It's Friday, and today we have a brand new Plan D release. That's right, Night of the Living Dead. Not to be confused with Night of the Living Dead 3D from 2006, which was an original 3D movie that borrowed the title, or Night of the Living Dead Reanimation 3D from 2012, which is another unrelated movie. And just to add to the confusion, there is also a genuine Night of the Living Dead 3D conversion of a colorized edition of this movie that was done about 15 years ago. However, it was never released on 3D Blu-ray, and so far as I can tell, it only had a handful of screenings and then just went away. Though I've certainly never seen it, if it was anything like the other conversions done at the time, then it would probably look dated today and not hold a candle to what iPop 3D's Plan D has provided for us today. This is a terrifically deep presentation that has very few noticeable defects and some very exciting stereo moments. The great thing about having the image pushed so deep into the screen is I noticed it feels like there's an ever-present, shall we say, opening for something to come in the frame. What's to the left or what's to the right? There always felt like there was a lot of space for something to just jump in from the side. Also, the wood floors and ceilings are easily perceived as boxy. And by boxy, I mean closed in, claustrophobic. For a moment, it reminded me of the 3D cave movie Sanctum, tunneling through a house looking for security. Now, fans of Evil Dead will immediately recognize the influence of the animal heads on the wall. Probably the best 3D moments of this movie. The impact of the stereo when they cut to it is genuinely shocking when these things are staring you down. And I love how they literally come right at you. And these stares are actually a good example of how the defects don't matter. The stereo gets lost in between the spokes holding the rail, so whatever passes behind it kind of bubbles out a bit. Weirdly, I noticed it immediately when I watched this on a small screen, but it completely escaped my attention when I watched it on a living room-sized TV. In fact, I sort of remembered it after the fact and rebound to the spot just to confirm I hadn't imagined it earlier. And I kind of had to force myself to look at the spot. And the hallway is so deep and narrow, the 3D does its job, and it's actually a really neat little shot. This shot, however, I sensed the girl's head went a little too deep in the screen, like her head went all the way past the guy's head, which made for a very weird moment, and probably the only time throughout the entire movie that I truly felt something was wonky or off. But what wasn't wonky, what was actually fantastic, was peering through windows and various other openings. 3D is all about having stuff in the way. You might even say it's as much about what you don't see as what you do. And very often when looking through an opening, I feel the inside of something I cannot see, and it brings up that wonderful portal into another world feeling. Only here it's more of a terrifying portal. Curiously, this ended up in the public domain pretty much on its first release. It wasn't due to abandonment, but rather just human error. At the last minute, they decided to switch the title from Night of the Living Ghouls, but in hastily printing up a new title, they forgot to include a copyright notice with it. And at the time, this was a requirement for legal protection in the US. Now, this was the 60s, and home media was still a decade away, so my guess is it probably wasn't too much of a concern at the time. Printing film was expensive, and duplicating from an existing print was impractical and created a soft image, so controlling access to the negatives to get a clean print was likely considered just as good as having a copyright, at least back then. Now, try watching this with the volume off while listening to a Christmas playlist. It stops being a horror and becomes a retail store documentary. Before this movie, George Romero had only made industrial films, mini documentaries, which was actually a perfect background for such a genre. Zombie movies are also, shall we say, MacGyver movies. Barricades, traps, and weapons all have to be built with improvised materials. Watching the process is indistinguishable from a how things are made episode. Now, Wikipedia tells us that the idea of zombies comes from Haitian folklore. Though I'm sure it does, the idea of a living dead human goes back probably as far as literature itself. For example, in the not really biblical, but still old book of Second Baruch, it describes a future earthly resurrection, not just of the good, but everyone, where the ugliness of the wicked will make up their visible form, combined with other ancient descriptions of the wicked after death, including a passing reference from Jesus himself regarding a graveyard worm that doesn't die, that taken as a whole could be describing a people whose ability to heal may be relative to the spirit they cultivated during their first life, similar to perhaps leprosy, which, who knows, might be inspiration. These sad souls are said to live with disfigurement, open sores, and constant rot, not terribly different than the modern idea of zombie or Christmas Eve at the liquor store.